Hello everyone, how are we? I hope we are well. Vigil, absolutely miles ahead, first in the chat by a long way because I don't think I was even in the chat at that point. Beat me to it by an absolute mile. Lovely to see you guys and lovely to talk Austria again. But not again, because technically last time was Styria. Was the Styrian Grand Prix. So Austrian from now onwards. Styria last week, but it's the same track. We've slightly got a different change though. Obviously the tyre compounds have changed, and this is something that maybe is not a huge factor, but I think it could mix up a little bit. We've seen lots of different tyre degradations over the course of the season. Obviously we all remember Baku and the fact that the tyres eventually just gave out on themselves. But we've seen lots and lots of different tyre strategies over the course of the season. We've seen it go very, very well, especially for Aston Martin in the past few races. They have just got the tyre strategy bang on every single time, in my opinion. Apart from, obviously, when Stroll's tyres gave up on him. But before that, it was looking like he was actually going to make up quite a few places by going long on those harder tyres. So it'll be interesting to see how that changes and whether the teams that are usually, the best at their tyre degradation, if we're looking at, Sergio Perez, the likes of him, sort of getting the best out of his tyres when he can, is that going to be the same now, or is it going to slightly change now that we're on slightly different tyres? Also, as you can just see me literally changing, because I didn't realise it would get so much bigger at 2,000 subscribers. Cannot thank you guys enough. Cannot give out my appreciation enough. I try and give back to you. I try and answer every single comment. Literally, I'll probably be spending in about 2.5 hours, 3 hours, just replying to various comments after I've finished this live stream with you guys. So it is amazing to chat with you guys and wonderful to get to know you a little bit better over the course of the last few weeks, and also just chat Formula One, get to know people in the Formula One community, and big things coming for the channel, I promise, including this show here, the pre-race sort of preamble. Not something I've done. I've only done it a couple of times. Did it last time for Styria, doing it this time for Austria. But I'd love to know what you guys want to know about this weekend. What are your thoughts going into Austria? Are you expecting exactly the same again? Or are you expecting a completely different change-up, a completely different race, and a completely different result? I'm sort of thinking it might be quite different, mainly because of the tyres, as I said. Tyre compounds, changing those tyre compounds can be really tricky for some teams to keep up with and to get their strategy right on those tyres. We saw last time Alonso just not work on those hard tyres, had to change the mediums for a bit of pace at the end. And now that option is sort of slightly changed this time around because of the tyre compound changes. Will we see a slightly different result? Some teams taking to the slightly softer compounds a lot better than other teams. We've seen lots of different tyre degradation. Like last time out, Valtteri Bottas looked dead on his feet by the end of the race, whereas, Sergio Perez, talked about him before as being a tyre management king. He looked absolutely flying at the end there, and I think if you've got the same degradation on a tyre which is slightly softer, we're going to see Bottas fall apart fairly quickly if his tyres are in the same sort of state that they were last time around. So very interesting to see how the tyres affect this weekend. I think that's the major talking point. I'd love to know what you guys think. Do you think the tyres are going to have that big an impact? Or do you think, Verstappen's just going to run away with it? Do we think, Hamilton's just going to be sort of dead and buried in second again, where he was nowhere near Verstappen, but also Bottas was absolutely miles off of him? Hamilton found himself in a little bit of a no man's land in second, didn't he? I was talking about it on my race roundup, the fact that Hamilton just didn't look like he was going to challenge, but also it didn't look like anyone else was going to get anywhere near Hamilton, or even the top four, to be honest. I know Lando Norris had an incredible race and was incredibly quick, but he still looked nowhere near that top four. Absolutely miles off the Red Bull and the Mercedes pace was Lando. I know he qualified ahead of them, but it was very quickly turned around, wasn't it? It was very quickly to sort of go from, oh, Lando might get himself a podium, to no, Lando's getting 5th at the absolute best. And you can't really say otherwise, because he was absolutely sensational, was Lando Norris. Again, another 5th place finish, another top 5 finish. He is just finishing in the top 5 consistently at this point. It seems like every single race we are talking about Lando Norris and the possibility of a podium. You know, it's not always a possibility, or it's not always come to fruition. You know, he if he was getting podiums every single race, we'd be looking at an absolute barnstormer of a season. But even being in and amongst the conversation every single race is just so incredibly amazing to see from someone like Lando Norris, and just continually showing that pace over and over and over again. Let's have a little look at the Drivers' Championship moving into this weekend, because I know it's been a big talking point, the fact that Verstappen was able to just elongate that lead a little bit. And I put out a post asking if people thought, you know, is this over now? I might actually get the community tab up so we can see some of the votes that you guys have put in over the last few days, and able to sort of understand where people are at in terms of their thought process when it comes to this season so far. So I put out a little vote. What do people think? Do people think that this race weekend is going to be different? Do we think it's not going to be different? And actually, it's gone very heavily in Verstappen's favour. Actually, George Russell, the second most likely driver to win the Austrian Grand Prix. So keep an eye out for that one. Could be very, very exciting if George Russell can get himself, even if George Russell got points, let alone up into a winning position. Hamilton then comes out with 11% of the vote. Sergio Perez, quite low actually. Thought Sergio Perez might be a little bit higher up there with 7%. And then Valtteri Bottas on 4%. So people are not believing in Valtteri Bottas. They're not getting behind the Valtteri Bottas train that might be happening over the next few weekends. I think everyone has just sort of come to the understanding that Valtteri Bottas just isn't going to quite make it work this season. So unfortunate for him. Doesn't look as good as Perez at the moment. I know he finished in front of Perez last time out, but as I said, if the race was one lap longer, Perez would have finished in front of him, and I think Perez is going to finish in front of him this weekend because of the tyre management that needs to be done. Valtteri Bottas cannot see him in the top 3. And, you know, it would be a really bad weekend for Valtteri if he was outside of the top 4. We've seen how quick the Red Bull and the Mercedes are in comparison to the rest of the field last time out. You know, everyone finished at least a lap behind them. But yeah, if there's one driver that's going to drop out of that top 4, it's going to be Valtteri Bottas, isn't it? It's going to be unfortunate for Valtteri, but it's just the way that it is. And, you know, the Drivers' Championship sort of reflects that a little bit. If we have a little look at this Drivers' Championship, it just shows you that lack of quality that maybe Bottas has had this season, or the lack of quality combined with the fact that he's been incredibly unlucky. Like, let's not beat around the bush. Valtteri Bottas has been so unlucky this season. So incredibly unlucky with the DNFs that he's had. Like, Hamilton has finished. The last time Hamilton didn't finish a race, was 3 seasons ago at this point. And yet, Valtteri Bottas seems to be not finishing races consistently. He's just never really finishing those races. Never quite finishing up where you'd expect him to be. And it's, I don't know, it's a little bit strange for me. I just find it kind of odd that I just find it really odd that, you know, he seems to have lost all of his like personality and verve that he had in that car. He seems to have just completely lost any sort of self-belief that he had, any sort of ideas that he had. And he just looks drained to me, does Valtteri Bottas. It's not a nice sight to see, unfortunately, at this moment in time for Valtteri Bottas, because he's just continually not delivering. And it's over and over again now that Bottas just isn't quite at the right standard, isn't quite catching up with Hamilton, isn't really putting up a fight with Perez. I know Perez went with a completely different tactic last time out, and he had to do so because he didn't qualify very well. If we look at the qualification, you know, Oh, no. Wait. I thought Perez... Oh, Perez... Actually. So Red Bull maybe got it a little bit wrong with Perez. I know they had a slow stop. But I thought Perez qualified by... Oh, no. Bottas had the 3-place grid penalty, didn't he? That's what I'm getting confused with. So actually, Perez started in front of Bottas. So maybe a little bit of a disappointing afternoon for Perez. But I think, as I said, one more lap and they'd have caught him. Or if they wouldn't have had that really dodgy pit stop for Perez, they'd have caught him. So I think Perez is going to finish in front of Bottas this weekend. I think then we're sort of looking at the Ferrari boys and Leclerc and Sainz both having good races, but for very different reasons. Sainz just having an incredibly good race, starting in 12th and getting his way up the field into a solid points finish, 6th place finish for Sainz. And that's just an incredible finish all in all when you think about it. And then Leclerc having a good race, but for another completely different reason. So I know that Leclerc won Driver of the Day. I talked about how I personally think that Sainz should have got Driver of the Day. I think he was much better than Leclerc. But Leclerc obviously had all the moves and had all the taking over of the back markers whilst he was sort of shredding his way through the field. And the Ferrari looked very quick. It makes you wonder, if Leclerc wouldn't have had that accident with Gasly at the start, if he would have just judged that a little bit better and not had to stop for a new front wing, Leclerc was in a really good position. I think that's becoming a little bit of a habit for Leclerc now. We talk about him constantly, getting pole positions and then not starting the race in Monaco, getting a pole position in Azerbaijan and not really being able to do anything with it. And again, like last weekend, qualifying exceptionally well, showing the race pace, but having an incident, having a problem, having an issue that then costs him in the long run. Like, would he have finished in front of Norris? Maybe. It would have been really lovely to see a little battle between Leclerc and Norris and to see who would have come out on top, but we weren't able to see that because of Leclerc's mistake. And of course, that took Gasly out of the race as well. And Gasly would have been gutted because he would have been looking at another points finish, picking up another few points, just again, elongating that lead over Ricciardo that he's currently got at the moment, and maybe edging towards Sainz and Leclerc. But because Gasly couldn't finish the race, Sainz finished in front of him, Leclerc finished in front of him, finishing in the points. So they just sort of stretched that lead a tiny little bit. And I think that'll be a bit of an incentive for Gasly this weekend. I can see Gasly really going for this weekend because he'll be a little bit annoyed at last time out. He'll be a little bit annoyed that, nothing was really done about the incident. Lots of people saying Charles Leclerc probably should have had a penalty. I'm sort of in the marginal camp that I slightly blame Leclerc, but at the same time, it's kind of a racing incident. I don't think he would have wanted to do it either, and it did cost him that pit stop. But yes, it did cost Gasly the race. Bit of a grey area, isn't it, where both things don't really add up, and, an eye for an eye, whole world's blind. So unfortunately, Gasly and Leclerc, it was a bit of an incident of like 50-50 for me. Could Leclerc have had a penalty for it? I think he was punished enough by the fact that he then had to get through everybody and completely change up his tactics for the race. Maybe it did him sort of good in the long run that he was able to completely change up those tactics. But for me, Leclerc needed to just show a little bit of composure, and then it would have been maybe even a much better finish for him last time out. Then we're talking about Ricciardo, had an awful weekend. Again, just did not happen for him last time out, did it? Looked like it was going to, and then had an issue. So just again, didn't happen for him. Couldn't really go in his favour. Alonso had a very good race considering how slow he was on those harder compound tyres. He sort of reinvigorated his race when he got back onto the mediums. And you got to remember, at one point, he was leading a trail of cars. No one could get past him just because everybody had DRS, so everybody was defending from everybody behind them. But he left a real train of cars going behind him at one point, Alonso. So hopefully we can see a little bit more from the Alpine. I know that consistently finishing in the points is exceptionally good for Alpine, especially when they are, that 13 points behind Aston Martin, and they're trying to make up that gap every single weekend. And luckily, they did managed to sort of plug that gap a little bit with the Aston Martins not having the greatest of weekends. Vettel's still though on 30 points and Stroll on 14. If you look at Alonso and Ocon in comparison, you can just tell there's a little bit of a gap of quality in there at the minute, especially with Ocon at this point in time. Moving on to the Alpines and Aston Martins. Ocon just doesn't look at the races, does he? I don't know what it is with Ocon. Since he's got that 3-year deal with Alpine, and he's got his seat sort of basically guaranteed for the future, he, they stamped him as the future of Alpine. They stamped him as, these are the guy, or this is the guy that's going to take us forward. This is the guy we're going to hang our hat on. A little bit like what they did with Ricciardo when they brought him in at Renault. They were like, okay, this is our championship driver. This is our driver who can propel us forward, that can find every single little inkling of the car. You're assuming that's what they kind of thought with Ocon. They were like, okay, Ocon's going to be our guy moving forward. Alonso's not going to be here forever, and Alonso is getting on a little bit, as we found out in the press conference with Max, where Max was talking about being a child running around the grid while his dad was racing and Alonso was making his debut in Formula One. Alonso has been here for a while. So Alonso can't be the future of Alpine. He can't be the guy that Alpine are putting forward as their man moving forward. And therefore Ocon sort of looked like it was going to be, but since then his form has dropped off a cliff. No points in forever, what feels like. A horrible French Grand Prix, and I don't know, an awful French Grand Prix, an awful Austrian Grand Prix, showed no pace whatsoever. I do think they will regret signing Ocon for Gasly. I think you're exactly right there, mate. I think the difficulty for them was Ocon was already in the team. Ocon was actually having a really good start to the season. And myself, and I know a few other people, obviously Ocon isn't in the Mercedes driver program anymore, but he's still got that link with Toto Wolff. And we were thinking about, oh, okay, if George Russell actually has a bit of a dodgy season, could we see an Ocon move to Mercedes? And there were a few people sort of talking about it. I remember chatting about it a little bit with guys in and amongst the community, but it never really came to fruition. And as soon as he got that Alpine deal, it just fell apart. And he really has had no pace. Vettel and Stroll are a little bit of an awkward one for me. So Vettel and Stroll seemingly have a really good pace. And actually, we can look at these standings for free practice 2, was it? Let's have a look at free practice 1 first, because actually there's a few talking points in there. So just to summarize sort of Aston Martin, I think they've actually got really good pace. And I think they're going to give AlphaTauri, especially while Tsunoda is still learning the car, I think they're going to give AlphaTauri a real run for their money for that 5th place finish in the championship. With Aston Martin's, both drivers are really, really consistent. Vettel and Stroll, Stroll, you could argue, has had a few qualifying that have not really gone his way, but Vettel seems to have found a real home in the Aston Martin team at the moment, doesn't he? He's really back in his groove. Didn't quite get into the points last time out, but was very... Oh no, wait, he did, didn't he? He did get into the points, but was sort of very close to not, basically. It was quite a close little game that they had between them. Where are we? Styria. So yeah, it was a bit of a weird race result. I think if Yuki Tsunoda wouldn't have shown the pace that he did, we're looking at an Aston Martin probably creeping into the points with Sebastian Vettel there. Yes, this track isn't really for them, I don't think. But at least Sebastian Vettel is looking a little bit more at home in this car and a little bit closer to where we expect him to be. And of course, Lance Stroll was the one who got into the points. I got those mixed up around. Yeah, so Stroll managed to get an 8th place finish. I should really get it up in front of me. He managed to get an 8th place finish last time out. Did Lance Stroll. And, finishing in front of Fernando Alonso, finishing in front of Yuki Tsunoda. Again, just giving Aston Martin a little bit more points than Alpine and AlphaTauri. I know it's only a couple more points than Alpine and 1 more point than AlphaTauri, but they're still, keeping themselves in that battle, making up that tiny little bit of ground, elongating that lead on Alpine, closing in on AlphaTauri, and it was just an overall pretty good race for Aston Martin. I was expecting both of them to be in the points, to be honest with you. And I think Seb could have got into the points given a few more laps. He always seems to have pace at the end of the race when the tyres are going off. We saw it in Baku when we had the red flag incident. If you give him 3 or 4 laps, he can deliver. And Sebastian Vettel just, as I said, looks much, much more at home in that car at the moment. Final sort of 3 teams to talk about. Not really too much to say about Alfa Romeo. Another really, really good drive from Kimi Räikkönen to get into 11th place. And, on another day, Leclerc's wing doesn't quite go the same way and he doesn't manage to get back into the top 10. Or, I don't know, maybe Tsunoda ditches it at some point and again doesn't really get it into the top 10. And we're looking at another point for Kimi Räikkönen, which would be another really, really good point for Alfa Romeo. Williams, all the talk is on Russell, right? All of the talk is about whether Russell can do the same this weekend as he did last weekend. Can George Russell get himself up into the points, get himself in a position where he can fight with the big boys? He looked fairly comfortable, actually sort of driving in 8th place for a considerable amount of time up until the first pit stop, but it's whether he can stay in there. It's whether he can stay in there and really battle with them, because the whole car just shut down, right? After it had those 20 or so laps, 30 or so laps in and amongst the fight, the Williams car just isn't designed to do that. They didn't expect to be in heavy traffic throughout the race. They don't really expect to be in the points, and therefore the car really doesn't adapt well to being in the points. So it will be, again, interesting to see. George Russell said a lot of the pace came from the fact that it wasn't very windy, which is a bit of a surprise, I guess. So I guess we're hoping for less wind again this weekend, although I'd love a bit of rain. And, wind and rain sort of come hand in hand together a lot of the time. Can George Russell find another team if Merck decide not to go for him? Ooh, I think the only sort of options he's got, I guess you could have said that Alpine seat, but they've sort of stamped their authority on Ocon now. You'd expect, they're going to give Ocon another season just because he's been terrible over the last few races. Doesn't mean he might not turn it around by the end of the season. And I'd be very surprised if they sort of cancel that contract. You've got Perez, only on 1-year contract. Whether Red Bull would go for someone like a George Russell, it'd be definitely a left field shout. But some people said that about Perez. Perez isn't part of the Red Bull driver program. They were expecting somebody from AlphaTauri or from F2 maybe to sort of take that step up. Lots of people said it might be Gasly again. And then Gasly said, no, I'm going to stay at AlphaTauri. Then people said, well, maybe they'll get sort of, I don't know, maybe a Danny Kvyat in, or Tsunoda could have gone straight up into the Red Bull team. There's lots of different options that Red Bull have, and Perez was a little bit of an outside shout. No one really expected Perez to be in the Red Bull, so maybe they'll go for another little outside shout. They'll try and get George Russell and sort of sneak him from under the nose of Mercedes. They love to sort of get a one-up on Mercedes, don't they, Red Bull? So that wouldn't be out of their remit to go and grab the driver that has been seemingly sort of set up to be the next world champion at Mercedes, and then make him the next world champion at Red Bull. I'm sure Christian Horner would absolutely lap that opportunity up. But apart from that, I think Vettel is very good at Aston Martin. I don't think they're going to move him on. I think they keep Stroll just because, they're still investing in the team and the factory and building that up, especially for next year. I don't think he'd want to move to a Haas. I don't think he'd want to move to an Alfa Romeo. McLaren, if Ricciardo moves on, I don't know if they move on Ricciardo, though. I know he's been poor in comparison to Norris, but he's still up in 9th place. The only driver you'd say should be in front of is Gasly there, out of the drivers' standings. If we're looking at McLaren being 3rd or 4th best team, you're looking at both of their drivers being in the top 8 effectively, and Ricciardo's almost there, but it's going to be close. And I don't think there's many spaces for Russell to really take. If Alonso leaves Alpine, could possibly slot himself in there. Yeah, I think it's Alpine. Mercedes is the one, right? But I think it's Alpine or McLaren, possibly, that George Russell could find a seat in. Red Bull as a real outside shout. But honestly, I think if he doesn't get a move to Mercedes this season, he's going to be struggling a little bit to find something other than the Williams drive. And whether he'll want to stay at Williams for another year, it seems like a very long time that he's been at Williams now. I know he's only come into the sport a couple of years ago, but, you know, you're looking at Norris and Sainz and Leclerc all sort of taking steps forward in their career. Verstappen could possibly be a world champion by the end of this season. Gasly is taking incredible steps forward, and you're looking at George Russell and those drivers that are of a similar age, and you could argue of a similar ability, even though George Russell is talked of as the best of that bunch, and he's not getting the opportunity that those guys are. You know, Norris has got continual podium finishes, got a couple of podium finishes this year, a few last year. Same with Leclerc. Leclerc's got some pole positions added to his tally of things that he's achieved in Formula One. Gasly's got another podium and a race win to his name. Verstappen, as I said, could be a champion soon. And Russell is languishing down in 17th in the championship when he was talked about as the best driver of that bunch. He was talked about as better than Norris, better than Leclerc, better than Gasly, on par with Verstappen a lot of the time. You know, we were talking about Russell taking over Hamilton's sort of lead in that Mercedes team and being the driver that is going to win them championships again. And I don't see it happening if it's not very soon that he's able to take that step up, because he's just going to be losing out on that race pace. He's going to be losing out on that racecraft. You know, we've got Norris, who's understanding the car more, Leclerc understanding the car more, understanding Formula One more, and understanding what it takes to get points, what it takes to get podiums. And Russell isn't even given that opportunity to understand what it takes to get up to podiums, to get to the top of the grid. Who do I think is going to be the next driver to retire? I mean, it's got to be Kimi, right? It's got to be Kimi. He's getting on a bit, is Kimi. Like, to be fair, we say it every single year and it never seems to happen. I always think it's going to be Kimi, and then it never is. You could also argue, you know, Alonso, but I think Alonso will stick out those 2 years at Alpine, and maybe not anymore. Apart from that, you know, I think the only other argument to have is that, you know, Hamilton may retire, but purely on the fact that he's sort of done with the sport. I don't think that'll be an age thing. You know, we could see Hamilton go for another few years and be incredibly successful. But I think if Hamilton sort of loses interest in the sport, I think that's the thing. Hamilton has so much more going on than some of the other drivers on the grid. He seemingly has a lot more projects that he's working on, and continually sort of shows that the fact that he is a big celebrity outside of Formula One as well. And I know other drivers are massive celebrities, but Hamilton just seems to be the one that has the most going on all of the time. You always see Hamilton doing stuff off the grid and continually working with different people. So I think, yeah, it's Raikkonen and Alonso, the old guys that you'd expect to be the next to retire. But, you know, Alonso's come back and Raikkonen's come back after breaks before. So you never know. They might say they're retiring and just come back again. Like I was rewatching some seasons previous, and, you know, Felipe Massa was retiring. It was his last Brazilian Grand Prix, and then a couple of seasons later he was back on the grid. So even when you're gone, you're not quite 100% gone, but properly retire, hang up their sort of racing wheel forever. It's got to be Alonso or Raikkonen, hasn't it? Just purely on the age factor. It's quite a young grid we have overall. There's lots of young drivers coming through, you know. if we think about the likes of Felipe Massa that were in Formula One for what seemed like forever, and now they're, taking that step back. It is a new generation of driver that's coming through. I know we've still got Hamilton and Vettel, Alonso and Raikkonen from eras bygone, but apart from that, it's quite a young grid that's coming through. Quite a few rookies, quite a few sort of rookies +1, +2. Norris has only been in there a few years, Russell only a few years, Tsunoda's a rookie, Mick Schumacher's a rookie, Mazepin's a rookie, Giovinazzi only a couple of years in. Yeah, it's gonna be Hamilton, Alonso, or Raikkonen, isn't it? Could I see Russell taking Tsunoda's seat? Absolutely not. No. Red Bull have got their own driver structure program, haven't they? And also, I don't think Russell would want to take that smaller step forward. I think he'd want a project. If you're looking at AlphaTauri are never going to be faster than Red Bull. It's just the way that sort of works. I think Russell would be wanting to move to a team that he can maybe make his own a little bit, rather than go into another team where there's sort of structure around him and things around him which stop him from really fulfilling what possibly might be his absolute peak performance. So I can't see Russell taking Tsunoda's seat. If anything, I could see Gasly moving on, Tsunoda being sort of brought into the team in more of a fruition, sort of almost becoming the more dominant driver in AlphaTauri, and then bringing another one of the guys from F2 through. Red Bull's F2 drivers are very, very good. I personally really like Daruvula, and I think he sort of fits Formula One quite well. He's also got that Indian background, so the backing from that would be absolutely phenomenal. When we're looking at drivers, you're looking at them as an entity as well as a driver, and as an entity, as someone who can bring in just absolute cash for the team. Definitely one to be looking at. And yeah, if it goes the way where Russell really is desperate for a seat, maybe he'll look at an AlphaTauri, maybe he'll look at sort of an Alfa Romeo. But I can't see that happening for him. I think it's Williams, Mercedes, and then after that it gets very tricky for George Russell, because he sort of hung his hat on the fact that he's going to be this Mercedes driver. He's hung his hat on the fact that Toto Wolff is his manager, and they've got an incredibly good relationship between them. But I think it could be very, very awkward if Russell doesn't get that seat in Mercedes. And I think he's well within his rights to start looking elsewhere personally. Let's have a look at this sort of weekend then. Some really lovely questions. Thank you for that. So free practice 1. And I know we can't really take much from free practice. But I did like Zhao coming in for Alpine. That was really nice to see. Sort of a new driver on the grid. Callum Eilert also coming in for Alfa Romeo. I do like when we get some sort of F2 drivers, backup drivers coming in for some free practices. Just sort of livens up the grid a little bit, doesn't it? Shows a little bit more. Gives us another driver to have a look at. Gives us another driver to get a feel for in Formula One. And actually, talking about Russell's seat, supposedly, if Russell moves on, Alpine are sort of very, very interested in taking that seat and giving it to an Alpine junior. So we could be seeing the first of Zhao in Formula One, and we could also see him in that Williams seat in the very near future if Alpine are able to sort of get that idea together with Williams and sort of take that seat almost from the Mercedes guys. Maybe Williams are going to go a slightly different direction. Maybe they're going to go for a different engine supplier. And, Williams would probably be willing to take a little bit of a diversion from the Williams-Mercedes. Because even though they've been working with Mercedes, they've not really taken that many steps forward, have they? You can't really say that the Williams-Mercedes partnership has done Williams massive favors. They don't look any sort of faster than they did a couple of seasons ago. They're still going to be backmarkers. They're still going to be fighting for points very, very rarely. Callum Eilert also in there for Alfa Romeo. I think he deserves an Alfa Romeo seat next year. I'd be very, very surprised if he isn't in an Alfa Romeo seat next year. As I said, I think Kimi is likely the next driver to go off of the grid. I know we say this every single year, but Kimi has to have a limit at some point. He's got to have an end to this dominance that he's got in Formula One at this moment in time. So, yeah, I think Callum Eilert is getting these free practices in, because I think he's going to come in sort of to the side of Giovinazzi. And we're looking at Giovinazzi. Is he going to take that step forward to Ferrari? I don't really think so. So Ferrari might be thinking of the next step along. Ferrari might be thinking about, okay, if Giovinazzi's not gonna take the step up to the heights of Ferrari, can we get somebody else in that maybe we can have a look at whilst they're at Alfa Romeo? They can get to know the Ferrari powertrain, they can understand the Ferrari engine a little bit, and then maybe push on slightly up to the Ferrari team. Because, Carlos Sainz and Leclerc are an incredible team, but you always want to have a little bit of an eye on maybe where the future might be, or maybe if something goes wrong, as much as we don't like to see it at all whatsoever. I absolutely hate to see drivers get injured or miss races because of an injury, but I think you always have to have that in the back of your mind because of the sport, because of the nature of Formula One. If something does happen, then who would step in? If Carlos Sainz, God forbid, had a bad accident, who would be stepping in? Would it be Giovinazzi? Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, how far in the future are they sort of looking just in case? And also, how far are they looking in the future just because, eventually you have to recycle drivers? We're looking at that at Mercedes at the moment, where people are saying, how long can Hamilton and Bottas just keep going as a pair? They're both very experienced drivers, but it feels like they need a freshen up, like somewhere along the line, right? But yeah, lovely to see some new drivers on the grid. Oh, and Roy as well in the Williams, taking the seat of George Russell, and of course performing better than Nicholas Latifi. Latifi just really can't catch a break, can he? Whether it's George Russell, whether it's Roy, it's just he just cannot get in front of the other person in the other Williams car. He just needs one, doesn't he, Latifi? Just give Latifi one bloody position ahead of George Russell just once in the season, and like a qualifying in a race, just let him come in front of George Russell once, or come in front of Roy once, and just give him that opportunity. I feel sorry for Latifi, bless him. Then we moved into free practice 2, and suddenly it was Mercedes topping the leaderboards. A little bit of a change. Obviously, we saw that beforehand with Hamilton topping the leaderboards in FP3 last weekend, and then doing absolutely nothing in the race. So, you can't always take something from this, but at least the Mercedes and Max Verstappen said himself, the Mercedes look a little bit better. Oh yeah, that's the very good point. Actually, I forgot about Mick being in the Haas. They probably will think about Mick as their next step, right? I think Giovinazzi sort of been pushed to one side, and Mick Schumacher is the next sort of Ferrari future driver that they're looking at. That is a very good point. What was I saying? Lance Stroll, Sebastian Vettel. Again, difficult to know what you can take away from a free practice, whether people are running really high fuel loads, whether they're trying something different with the tyres and the setup just to try and see what their race pace might be. But, a bit of a mix-up in there. Lando Norris all the way down in 9th place. Both the Aston Martins and both the AlphaTauris looking really, really good. Sergio Perez looking languishing down in 11th place. And again, I think maybe they were going for a slightly different tactic with Sergio Perez in this free practice. I can't imagine he is that far off the pace of the likes of Verstappen and Bottas. I can't imagine he's 7/10 slower, especially around this very, very short circuit. It is a 1 minute track, basically. Each lap is 1 minute, 71 laps. And, we saw last week, everybody, apart from the top 4, ended up a lap down. It is one of those tracks where, because of the fact that it is so short, there is a lot of traffic, there's a lot of cars going around. And yeah, maybe they were just trying something different with Perez, because I can't imagine he was that far off the pace. Carlos Sainz, again, as well, can't imagine that the Ferraris are this far off the pace. I know that they didn't qualify amazingly, did Carlos Sainz. Obviously, last time out, Carlos Sainz getting a 12th place qualification, but it wasn't this bad. So again, I think this free practice 2 may be a misnomer in that I don't think you can take really anything away from this of note. Apart from if you want to sort of speculate that Hamilton might be able to get in and amongst it with Verstappen this time out, that might be the case. But I personally don't think so. So it's going to be very, very close indeed. And as they've got here, Mercedes hit back. Hamilton leads 1-2 in second practice at the Redbull Ring. Will that really give us much to go on? I don't think so. Ferrari's race pace as good as last weekend, says Leclerc, despite P16 and FP2. So, as I was saying, I think they were trying their race pace. They were trying something different. And I can imagine that the Ferraris are hoping for a much better... I don't think it can get much better, but at least a much better start to the race, qualifying as well. You know, I think they're hoping that Carlos Sainz will be in that top 10 in the qualifying. I think they're hoping that Leclerc won't have an incident in turn one, and they can maybe have a little bit more of a battle with Norris or Gasly as well, who unfortunately sort of lost out in the race. But I think Gasly will be in and amongst it again, up with those top drivers. And I think, you know, Ferrari will be looking at that and thinking, actually, I'd like to have a little bit more going for me this weekend. I'd like to have a little bit more drive, a little bit more sort of incident with the McLarens, and maybe get in and amongst it slightly more than they were last weekend. So will Ferrari, you know, be battling with the top four? I don't think so. But if they can finish in front of Norris, then they'll be fairly happy, right? Because they're just making up more points on McLaren in the Constructors' Championship. And they're probably hoping that Daniel Ricciardo, again, has some sort of engine malfunction, because that really cost Daniel Ricciardo. He dropped down and out of the points very, very quickly because of that incident. And by the time it had fixed itself, it didn't feel like it fixed itself 100%. It felt like he was sort of nursing the car home for a lot of that race. Hamilton maintains that Red Bull have something extra in their bag. Of course, so again, we're getting this back and forth between Hamilton and Red Bull. I don't think it's going to stop at any point in the season. You know, Verstappen is always saying, you know, we've got the worst car. Mercedes are always saying, we've got the worst car. Oh, we haven't got any upgrades for this weekend. Well, we haven't got any upgrades either. Oh, well, you got rid of our flexi wing. Oh, well, you got rid of our front wing flexi wing. And, you know, it's just going to be table tennis between the two of them. You know, as much as Toto Wolff and Christian Horner look like they kind of get on, I think they probably do, to be honest. You know, it's kind of tricky. Nobody else on the grid or in the world is in a similar sort of position to them, where they have so many eyes on them in a sport which is so heavily, you know, tactical. And everyone is looking at Toto Wolff's every move. Everyone is looking at Christian Horner's every move. So they probably do get on just because they're both in that scenario together and they have quite a lot in common. But at the same time, they absolutely hate each other when it comes to racing, right? They despise each other. They're just trying to get every single little bit out of the other one all of the time. They're trying to make complaints. They're trying to get everything to go their way. You know, they're talking to the FIA constantly, and they're trying to any inkling that Mercedes get that Red Bull are doing something wrong, they will point it out. Any inkling that, you know, Red Bull are doing something, Mercedes will point that out as well. So it's one of those things. Alonso says Zhao executed FP1 perfectly. I think the same. He, you know, it was his first opportunity in Alpine, and I think if Alpine can get together a seat in another car next year, he would be my choice for who should take that seat for Alpine, personally. So, you know, if they do keep Alonso and Ocon, maybe they're able to get a junior driver seat somewhere. Maybe they're able to, you know, give their engine manufacturing over to another team in the same way that Ferrari do with Alfa Romeo, and in the same way that Mercedes do with Williams, and Red Bull obviously have a sister team in AlphaTauri. So Alpine could do with a little connection, couldn't they? Just to put Zhao in a car, get him some experience, a bit like we're seeing with Tsunoda this year at the moment. You know, get him a car that is in the midfield, gives him some opportunities to fight for some points, but isn't massively expecting in terms of continual race results. You know, Tsunoda, yes, he's come under some criticism, and, you know, I probably sit in that category myself, but actually I really like Tsunoda, and I think Tsunoda's going to be a very, very good driver. He just needs to find that balance between putting 100% effort into the car when he doesn't quite need to. That's what he's been talking about. So in France, it was the first practice session. Like, you should be fairly comfortably getting through that ahead of the Williams, the Haas, and the Alfa Romeo. So you didn't need to put absolutely every single little ounce that you've got into that and then spin off in turn one. And I think he just needs to get that balance right. Who do you think will be the catfish of free practice? Am I allowed to say Lewis Hamilton? Am I allowed to say Mercedes? Because I don't think they're going to be that close to the Red Bulls. I think the Red Bulls will still get away with it. Probably the Aston Martins. If you look at the free practice too, both Aston Martins, 5th and 6th. Very good, but also a little bit confusing for me. Don't think they're going to be that quick moving forward, personally, when it comes to the race weekend. Ricciardo and Norris confident McLaren's pace is better than it looked in Friday practice. Again, I think Ricciardo just looks so uncomfortable in the car, doesn't he? Any tiny little thing that goes wrong. So seemingly the issue that he had last week fixed itself. But you would not have guessed that it would have fixed itself by his pace. Like, I think it just completely set his mindset off. It just completely destroyed his possibility of racing because he was worried about it. You could see in his racing that he was worried about something going wrong, worried about an issue happening, worried about the possibility of not finishing the race, and therefore it cost him pace. It cost him pace. And, we've got Lando Norris spinning in free practice, actually. But I think Lando Norris can be fairly confident. He had an exceptionally good race last weekend, put himself in a completely different league to everybody else. Really was that Formula 1.5 that people sort of talk about. Easily 5th place. Yes, there was sort of talk about Carlos Sainz possibly being able to catch him towards the end of the race, but getting caught up behind Hamilton would have been interesting to see who'd have come out on top of that. But Norris, drove incredibly well, put himself in an excellent position in qualifying, qualified 3rd, put himself in an amazing position, drove really well. Yes, he was never going to keep the Mercedes and the Red Bulls behind him. That's absolutely fair enough. Maybe you could argue you could have put a little bit more of an effort into keeping the Red Bulls and Mercedes behind him, but I kind of think he knew that wasn't his race. And if he'd have absolutely ruined his tyres trying to keep Valtteri Bottas behind him for, 10 laps, but then eventually Valtteri Bottas would have got past, and then Carlos Sainz is on him, Leclerc's on him, then we're talking about, was it a professional drive from Lando? He really didn't look after his tyres well in the first sort of section of the race, blah, 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 blah. And I think that was what was maybe in his mind. It was like, actually, I'm not in a race with Red Bull. I kind of have to be in that mindset where I understand that I can get podiums, but it's going to likely be when something happens. It's going to likely be when there's an incident in front of me. I don't think that Lando Norris is in the mindset where he's like, actually, I need to get 2nd place. Because I think he'd be a little bit deluded to think that the McLaren's taken that many steps forward. Sim Racing Nerd, thank you for joining, mate. Appreciate it. And then the last bit of news then, Wolf carefully optimistic about Mercedes' chances in Austria, as Bottas says car feels better than last week. Of course they're going to say that. There did seem to be a few different changes though. What was it? The brake ducts I saw a picture of that have completely changed from last weekend. They've probably made some tweaks. They've definitely learned from last weekend and the fact that they were nowhere near Max Verstappen really. But it was quite a big deficit to try and make up in a week. And I don't know how much you can bring to the car in a week on the same circuit with the same drivers, with fairly similar conditions it looks like it's going to be. Maybe they changed the brake ducts for the softer compound tyres. Maybe they're thinking that the Red Bulls won't be able to deal with the softer compound as well as maybe they can, and they can try and make that work for them a little bit better. I think, Hamilton really needs to focus on qualifying. Max Verstappen just drove away from him was the problem. Like, Hamilton never really had an opportunity to fight with him because Max Verstappen over the first few laps of the race just managed to really elongate that lead, get himself in some nice clean air. And, Hamilton was in the dirty air of the Red Bull for a couple of laps and just never really came to fruition for him, did it? I think if he can qualify ahead of Max Verstappen, we're seeing a lot better race. We're seeing a lot more wheel-to-wheel action between them. We're seeing a real sort of change between those guys. And possibly, a bit more of a fight between the two rather than Max Verstappen driving down the road. Lando says he can challenge Verstappen if they were teammates. Your thoughts? In this form, yes. Lando Norris has been so good this season. I think it's been underplayed a little bit. How good Lando Norris has been to continually finish in the top 5. You know, we're looking at Valtteri Bottas and thinking, can you just continually finish in the top 5 for us in what is supposed to be the fastest car on the grid? And Lando Norris is doing that in what seemingly is the 3rd fastest car. You know, when you're looking at the 3rd fastest car, if everybody finishes, the best you can probably do is 5th. And Lando Norris is continually in that top 5, picking up podiums, picking up 5th places, picking up points. And the Drivers' Championship speaks for itself, to be honest. He is a massive jump ahead of Leclerc, a massive jump ahead of Sainz at this moment in time. Sainz needs to win a race and a bit to catch where Norris is. And I don't think that's going to happen. Norris would have to really drop off in the second half of the season for it to not go his way. And actually, I've got a video coming up about Lando Norris because I've talked about quite a few of the drivers on the grid, and one that really stands out to me that I haven't been able to really deep dive into is Lando Norris. But for me, he's probably the best driver on form, possibly apart from Max Verstappen. So that's where that sort of that's where that 50-50 comes in. Max Verstappen has also been elite this season. If you look at the standings, if you look at the results, where is it? If we look at the schedule, Verstappen is in every single podium. Every single one. Verstappen. Azerbaijan, he would have won that race had it not been for his tyres failing. You cannot blame him for that. So I'm calling that a Verstappen at least podium, if not win, pretty much guaranteed. Verstappen. Like, he has been immense. Like, it's been so incredibly good. I think maybe the only driver who's got better form than Norris at the moment is Verstappen, which is where that sort of quote, I guess, sort of falls down, because I think if you were looking at a form table, and I thought about doing this as a video, actually. I did a sort of pre-season form table. I'm definitely going to, in the summer break, sort of revisit some of those tier lists that I made towards the beginning of the season. If you haven't seen them, they are linked in my channel videos. But I think we need to have a look at Verstappen here, as he has turned it on this season. I think we have to look at Norris here and say he has turned it on this season. I think we have to look at Carlos Sainz and say Carlos Sainz has been incredibly good in a new team. You know, we're looking at these drivers and they're really coming to fruition in their new teams. I know that Carlos Sainz isn't quite on Leclerc yet, but if you think Leclerc's had a couple of pole positions, and Leclerc is seen as Mr. Ferrari, he's been there for so much longer, and he's only 8 points ahead. I think Carlos Sainz has done incredibly, incredibly well. Gasly as well. Gasly is in the form of his life. Unfortunately, the car just doesn't work for him a lot of the time. If we're looking back to Bahrain, he had an issue in the first race of the season. He's had issues in free practice last time out. He missed out on the free practice too. Then had clip from Leclerc and his race was completely over. You know, just hasn't really gone Gasly's way in a lot of the races this season. And I know you sort of make your own luck, but it's very tricky to see past Verstappen, Norris, and probably Sainz as the top 3 on-form drivers compared to where we expected them to be and where they are. I think they're the 3 that really stand out for me as sort of jumping ahead of where I expected them to be. I expected Norris to be in and amongst the midfield cars, and possibly, looking at Norris like maybe at a real stretch getting a podium. And, he's been in and amongst it. He's got 2 podiums so far. He's been in and amongst for quite a few other podiums along the way as well. Similar for Sainz. Like, Sainz, if you'd have told me at the beginning of the season Sainz would have a podium by this point, and especially in Monaco, I think he'd have snapped your hand off. I think he'd have absolutely taken that. I'd have absolutely taken that if I was Carlos Sainz, because you're moving into a new team. You've got Mr. Ferrari in front of you, Leclerc, that you've got to sort of find a way to get into this team without stepping on Leclerc's toes, because you can't look like you're being a bad team player. But at the same time, you want to show everybody that you're willing to, really put him under pressure. And I could see that sort of spin around, if Leclerc doesn't finish ahead of Sainz this weekend, Sainz edges ever closer to Leclerc. It's going to be very, very tasty between the two of them at the end of the season when Sainz has had a real opportunity to get to know this car. And Leclerc, you'd expect him to finish in front of Sainz, but will he? That's the real question for me. So I think on form, Lando Norris is in the top 3 drivers on the grid right now. I know he isn't in terms of the actual driver standings. You could say Perez has done incredibly well in a Red Bull, but I think he can turn it on and off sometimes. I know he's got a race win to his name. Again, I think if you told Perez at the beginning of the season you'd win one of the first 6 races, he'd have probably been fairly happy with that. I think I'd have certainly been very happy with that. I think Perez, though, would have wanted a few more podiums by now. So what's he got? A win and a 3rd place finish in France. And that's it for the podiums when it comes to Perez. And, I think Perez will want a few more podiums before we can really talk about him being like the form driver on the grid. So yeah, for me, the form driver on the grid, Verstappen, Norris, Sainz. They're the boys. I want an argument with someone, so I'm going to say I think if you put all the F1 drivers in the same car, Hamilton won't win and George will come top 3. Wow, that is very, very... I think the only thing at the minute with George is he doesn't have that experience of battling. He doesn't have that... I know he's got it from other formulas, but he doesn't have the experience of battling in a Formula 1 car, trying to keep a Formula 1 car going in dirty air, trying to keep a Formula 1 car under grips while you're maybe getting attacked from behind, trying to keep a Formula 1 car going. Yes, you could argue, obviously, he's got that drive in the Mercedes with Sakir, but I don't know. It's continual experience, right? We've seen it with Norris over the last few seasons. Like, Norris came out of the blocks last season incredibly well as well and had a massive lead on Carlos Sainz, who was his teammate at the time. And Carlos Sainz slowly chipped that away and ended up actually finishing in front of Norris. I can't see that happening this season. I think Norris has taken a step up, has completely jumped forward, and Ricciardo's going to be nowhere near Norris by the end of the season. I know about 4 or 5 races ago, I think it was before Monaco, I made a video on Daniel Ricciardo, talked about how Daniel Ricciardo actually could probably catch Norris if he can turn it around within the next few races. He hasn't turned it around. I think Norris is absolutely flying, and I don't think Daniel Ricciardo is going to get anywhere near him by the end of the season. I'll probably come back to bite me, but personally, I can see that as the way that it's going. Who do you think would likely win the World Drivers' Championship, Norris, Leclerc, or Russell? I think they're all in and amongst those drivers that are in that mix, right? You're sort of looking at the five next generation drivers: Verstappen, Norris, Leclerc, Russell, and Gasly for me. A sort of, maybe not Gasly. I don't know if you can sort of put Gasly in that same sort of category, but you're looking at Norris and Leclerc and Russell, and they were all sort of coming through into F1 at the same sort of time. Obviously, Norris and Russell had their rookie season in exactly the same season, and I think it's just the stark difference that Norris was able to get himself in a McLaren team, a team that was looking forward, a team that has got really well put together staff, and has taken that step forward. And then you're looking at George Russell, who managed to get himself in a Williams, obviously because he was linked in with Mercedes, but George Russell, I think, has taken steps sideways. I don't think he's taken many steps forward at Williams. Whereas if you look at Lando Norris, he has taken incredible steps forward over the last few seasons. He's found this consistency. Again, I'm going to say it. Norris finishing in the top 5 every single race is insane. I know he's got that one, 9th place finish. Apart from that, in the top 5 every single race when you are in the 3rd fastest car is the best place that you can put yourself in if everybody finishes. Norris has been electric. Norris has been so good. And I can't see why people are underestimating Norris this season or a little bit confused at why I'm massively happy for Norris at this moment in time. What do I think of Lance Stroll? I think he's making slow steps forward. He was ahead of Vettel in the Drivers' Championship very early in the season. You maybe expect that because he's been at the team before and Vettel was still trying to find his sort of footing in Aston Martin. But Stroll, he's had a few tough races. I don't think he's had as tough a races as someone like Ocon. But he's had a few tough races as Stroll. Azerbaijan, you can't really blame him. It was a tyre and probably would have got points in that race. But it didn't help that because his tyre blew up, it gave his teammate basically the opportunity to then go and grab a second place finish. So, if you take that second place away from Vettel, Stroll is still ahead of Vettel in terms of points. So, lots of people talking Vettel up at the moment, but I think it's still actually quite close between them. I know you can't really just deduct 18 points from Vettel and say, Stroll's actually the better driver. But it kind of lends itself to them being a little bit closer than maybe what the Drivers' Championship says, because Stroll would have picked up points in Azerbaijan, in my opinion, and Vettel would have picked up points too, but it might have been like a 4th or 5th place if, Verstappen hadn't had the issue, Hamilton hadn't had the issue, and things around him hadn't gone quite in his favour. Like, Vettel managed to have a perfect race in Azerbaijan. He got absolutely everything right, and the Baku track just suits him down to the ground. And, that 18-point swing where Stroll maybe missed out on 4 to 6, maybe 8 points, and Vettel managed to gain like 8 points as well. That was a massive sort of 16-point swing, and that is what Vettel is now in the lead with. So I think actually Stroll is pretty comparable to Vettel at this moment in time. And I'm hoping that he can sort of continue to take little steps forward. I think the problem with Stroll is if he's going to, really fight for a world championship, if Stroll's going to find a car that is going to fight for a world championship, he's going to have to wait until it's Aston Martin. I can't really see him moving anywhere else, you know what I mean? Obviously, I know his dad is like incredibly grounded in Aston Martin, but it doesn't mean that he has to stay there. But I just can't see a seat coming up for him anywhere else either. And I don't know, is Aston Martin going to be a championship winning team in 2-3 years' time? Possibly. We've seen teams come through when Mercedes first started and they had Rosberg and Schumacher. They were a midfield team. They were fighting for points continually, and then they made that step forward. They signed Hamilton, and then they sort of blew up, didn't they? The Mercedes team. It does happen. These drivers, these cars, it's cyclical. They go through these cycles, and Aston Martin, definitely can get themselves up towards that position. And I think that's the only way that Stroll is ever going to be able to really fight for continual wins, continual podiums, if Aston Martin become like the 2nd or 3rd best car on the grid, which they're not quite there at the moment, are they? You could maybe argue they're the 5th or 6th, maybe even 7th fastest, with Alpine being a little bit unlucky with some of the points. And again, that massive point swing that Vettel managed to get and Gasly managed to get in Baku, really sort of separating them out in terms of the constructors. Yeah, I think you're looking at Aston Martin at the minute being 5th place, good. 6th place, good. But if Stroll really wants to take a step forward, he has to wait for Aston Martin to take the step forward. So as much as he's a good driver, I think he's stuck in the team that he's in and will really struggle to, really take that next step forward and become a race winner, a podium sitter, that kind of thing. I think Gasly missed his chance. I completely agree as well. It was too early to put him in that Red Bull. It was also a horrible weekend for him. He lost his best friend. I think we've got to remember, as much as these are sports people, and lots of journalists say this about footballers all the time, you can see sports people as a bit of a robot because they're not overly accessible. They seem like these absolute behemoths. They seem like these sort of statuesque people that are on top of a mountain that some of us are never going to reach. I'm actually making a video about just the general cost of Formula One, how much these Formula One drivers are paid. And the least paid driver is paid £500,000 a year. And I know you've got to be within the top 20 drivers in the world to get into Formula One. You are more than worthy of earning millions and millions of pounds. But because of that, they're sort of put on this podium. They're put in this place where normal people can't really aspire to where they are. But Gasly, it was a very human sort of performance from him, wasn't it? He struggled. You could see he was in a place where he was struggling, and Red Bull is not the team to go into if you're struggling. Red Bull is known for being cutthroat. I was watching an interview with an ex-Red Bull junior where literally if you weren't within the top 10 drivers of your age group at that time, Red Bull would just drop you like a dime. Like, they were not bothered at all. They are looking for the absolute elite, those drivers that are ready and raring to go. They're not looking to build relationships with drivers. I don't think Red Bull are the kind of team that are looking to take in a driver really, really young and nurture him into this incredible driver. They are looking for natural talent. They are looking for the best of the best, straight off the bat, naturally gifted. And I think, that's why we've seen Verstappen do so well in a Red Bull, because he is so naturally gifted. Like, we can see that every single race. Verstappen gets the absolute most out of that car that he possibly can. And he's so incredibly naturally talented. And then Red Bull have just, built the team around him to give him as much pace as possible. They haven't nurtured him. They haven't taken him in. They haven't, taken him in when he was really struggling or anything. Verstappen hasn't really had much of a down point in his career at all. Like, he's just sort of continued to go from strength to strength to strength. He wins his first race in a Ferrari in a Red Bull in 2016. Yes, the two Mercedes collided with one another, but he goes on to win that first ever race he has with Red Bull. That's the kind of relationship you need to have with Red Bull. I think if Gasly came in that first race and won it, we'd be looking at a completely different thing, right? Because he'd just had that confidence and would have carried it through. But when it starts to go wrong at Red Bull, we've seen lots of drivers really struggle. Same with Albon. I think Albon was done really dirty. Like, he missed out on podiums and stuff because Hamilton kept hitting him. And yet, Red Bull, they looked at his points at the end of the season and were like, you're not good enough. And he was like, actually, I would have got like 45 more points had I not been hit by Hamilton here, and made this mistake here. And they were like, no, still not good enough, unfortunately. We're going to bring in Sergio Perez and you're going to go to AlphaTauri. Or you're basically not even going to go to AlphaTauri. You're going to go to a test driver at a random team. Or a test driver at Red Bull. And then the AlphaTauri, what is he? He's in another racing series that I can't remember the name of now, Albon. He's just been completely stricken aside when, we were looking at George Russell, Albon and Norris all coming through together. And you look at where Norris is now, you look at Russell being continually linked with Mercedes, and Albon is just sort of nowhere. And I think Red Bull is that kind of team where you can get lost. You can just sort of drop by the wayside. You can disappear into the background. Daniel Kvyat was an incredibly good driver. He's disappeared by the wayside now because it's not Red Bull. It's not going to sort of happen. Where was I? Feeling Lewis Hamilton win is on the horizon. I do not. Should we go through my predictions? I think that's where we'll sort of end up with this stream. We'll sort of come to a conclusion ready for tomorrow. I've gone bold. With my prediction. I've tried to make it interesting. Mainly moving forward in the Drivers' Championship. I'd like to see Perez get another win. I think his pace was good last weekend. I think he'll have learned quite a lot. And I don't think he'll make the similar sort of mistakes that he did. And I don't think Red Bull will make another mistake in the pit stops. Because they don't. Because Red Bull are always the best at pit stops. And it was a bit of an anomaly that they had like a slow stop by their standards, a fairly normal stop by everyone else's standards. But Perez, I could see. I'd just quite like to see Perez win. As much as it's maybe an outside shout, I'd like to see Perez win. I'd like to see Hamilton just get in front of Verstappen a little bit. I'd like to see that gap narrow rather than elongate in terms of the Drivers' Championship. Wait a minute, this is not my predictions. It's very similar to my predictions. But I've just realised that I did not have Daniel Ricciardo in my predictions. This is last week's predictions. I apologise. What a bad boy I am. Oh, I switched it around completely. I thought I still had Perez top one. I do these on a Thursday, so sometimes I just completely forget. I've got Hamilton winning. Wow. I'm kind of regretting that now after sort of sitting down and actually thinking about FP1 and FP2. Well, I've got Hamilton winning. So yeah, I guess I do see a Hamilton win on the horizon. Verstappen second and Perez third. I don't know, actually. I've seen Perez doing a little bit better. I kind of want Perez a little bit higher. But I've done the predictions now, so they're done. I've gone Gasly top 5. I think he was a little bit sort of outdone last week. Not really his fault. I think that Leclerc cost him quite dearly, Gasly. I know he didn't get a great start, and it'll be interesting to see what their race pace is really like, because we didn't get to see their race pace, and we know that Gasly continually delivers in qualifying. He always delivers in qualifying. It was whether he can take that step up and deliver race pace. I think they'll have race pace, and I think maybe Gasly will get into the top 5. I'm also expecting a little bit of rain. And I think Gasly will do quite well in the rain. You know, he knows that AlphaTauri car really, really well. And that really does stand you in quite good stead when it rains. If you know the car a little bit better, it helps out a little bit more, just because you have a bit more of a feel for the natural sort of rhythm of the car itself. So I think Gasly, you know, will do incredibly well and get into the top 5. I've got Russell in my top 10. Very optimistic, but he was in 8th last time around. I need it to not be raining. I need it to not be windy. And I need Russell just to maybe have a little bit more space when he gets into a points position, because I think running behind those other cars and having the cars behind him, putting that Williams under so much pressure, it was in lots of traffic, you know, it just didn't work in those conditions, did it? And we saw it basically fall apart by the time they got to the first pit stop. Really unfortunate for Russell, but I think it was sort of a fact they were in and amongst the traffic all the time, that the Williams isn't used to, and therefore the Williams just sort of fell apart. And I think Carlos Sainz will have a wild weekend. I've gone for Carlos Sainz as my wild card, so I can see, like, if Carlos Sainz got a podium, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked by that if Carlos Sainz got a podium. I think Carlos Sainz, you know, if he got a podium, it'd be on merit, and it'd be really, really well deserved. And last time out, I would have loved to have seen him and Norris go wheel to wheel a little bit towards the end there. And maybe we'll get to see this time. Maybe, you know, if he gets into Q3, qualifies a little bit better, puts himself in a bit of a better position, like first off, doesn't get trapped behind the likes of Alonso and Russell that he was at the beginning of the race. You know, Carlos Sainz, I think is going to, again, have a really good points finishing position this weekend. I think, you know, is going to be a really, really close race at the top, hopefully. I think the tyre compound is going to make so much of a difference. Because we saw last weekend, some of the teams on the hard tyre came to life, and some of them just completely fell apart. And now that isn't an option, right? We've completely changed the tyre degradation that we're going to see. We saw Bottas towards the end of the race, or literally for like the last 15 laps of the race, Bottas was absolutely falling to pieces in terms of his tyre degradation. If he does the exact same this weekend, they are really going to fall off a cliff, because they're not going to be the hard compounds. So, yeah, very, very tricky to see Sainz not in the top 10, basically. And that's why I went for Sainz my wild card, because I could see him really putting his weight amongst those guys towards the top end of the field and really showing his quality when it comes to this weekend. Perez needs to do a better job in quali. I agree, although he qualified 4th last time out. I think that does seem to be where he's next needing to take a step forward, because he's continually good race pace, right? He's continually good at managing his tyres. He's very good at going for a different strategy to other people. But yeah, Perez, I really, really like personally. I think Perez is one of the best drivers on the grid, all in all. As an overall package, as a driver, I think Perez is really, really good. Yes, I do agree. His qualifying is maybe where he needs to take that little step forward. Which team do I think has the strongest driver pairing right now? Red Bull. Red Bull followed by possibly Ferrari. I don't really like Bottas. I think Bottas is done with as much as he's good. As much as Bottas is very, very good, I can't see him, you know, hanging around at Mercedes for very long. Yeah, I do just quite like the Ferrari pair. I would say McLaren, but Norris is absolutely flying and Ricciardo is absolutely nowhere, right? Gasly I really like. Tsunoda I think needs a season. I think Tsunoda's going to be a really good driver. I can just sort of see like inklings of incredible driver in him, but hasn't quite come to fruition in every single race so far this season. Vettel and Stroll, pretty good. Alonso and Ocon, bit nonplussed about. I do like Alonso, I do like Ocon. I'm not like massive fans of them either. They sort of sit nowhere. Raikkonen and Giovinazzi I think is a bit of a nothing pairing. Russell Latifi, really like Russell. not a huge. I don't think Latifi is going to be, a world champion ever. He's not really going to bring much to the table, is he? And then Mick Schumacher, Mazepin, similar sort of thing. It's too early to say, really. They're both rookies. So in terms of the best driver pairing on the grid, it's got to be Red Bull or Ferrari for me. Red Bull, very, very good. Perez has taken Red Bull to another level. I don't think it's coincidence that Perez has come into that second seat in Red Bull and suddenly we're seeing them come to fruition, right? We're seeing them dominate the Constructors' Championship, dominate the Drivers' Championship, sort of being either side of Hamilton there in second. And Perez could even make up a few more points on Hamilton this weekend, and I wouldn't be surprised by that if I did see Perez win and make up a few more points on Hamilton and really get in and amongst it. I think Red Bull this season, they've got that perfect balance between those driver setups. I think Perez is more than happy to sort of play second driver at the moment whilst he learns the car. And whilst he learns that second driver, he's still putting in really good performances. So yeah, absolutely love Perez. Leclerc, I really like. I think Leclerc has a lot of natural talent. There's a reason that Ferrari went for him and gave him that 5-year contract, and they sort of stamped their authority on Leclerc, and they were just like, yes, you are going to be the one for us moving forward. And I absolutely love Carlos Sainz. That might be the McLaren fan in me, and the fact that I was sort of a little bit gutted that he moved on from McLaren, to be honest. I think, imagine if he was in the McLaren this season and Norris is getting this out of the car. We could see Carlos Sainz on similar points to Bottas, I reckon. I think genuinely with it, McLaren would be in and amongst it. Possibly even fighting Mercedes for second. Probably not. But I think they'd be by far and away the third best team if Sainz was still at McLaren. I think they'd be by far and away. And you can see that, right? Because Norris is absolutely carrying the McLaren team in comparison to Ferrari at the moment in time. Like Leclerc and Sainz have pretty comparable points. If you look at the gap between Norris and Ricciardo, it's absolutely bloody ridiculous. So yeah, it's got to be either Red Bull or Ferrari for me in terms of the best driver pairing. Such a sore loser. Is that me? Mate. To be fair, I'm quite a sore loser. Especially Mario Party. Just absolutely grinds my gears. Just can't. If I lose at Mario Party, just don't talk to me for a couple hours. Gio points. I think Kimi's more likely to get the points. An 11th place finish last time out. Gio didn't really look anywhere. I think that's a good shout though. I think Gio would very much like to finish in front of Raikkonen this season, especially if Raikkonen's going to retire and Giovinazzi can't finish in front of a retiring Kimi Raikkonen. It doesn't really lend that well for his career moving forwards, does it? Poor Giovinazzi. I don't think he's ever going to get that move to Ferrari that people were sort of umming and ahhing about a couple of seasons ago. But yeah, Giovinazzi. Leclerc top 4. I like that. I like that as a shout. Can I replace Sainz top 4 rather than Leclerc top 4? Even though, I know Leclerc qualified in front and obviously would have been in front of Sainz had he not had that incident. I think the two of them are going to have a little bit of a battle this weekend. I think they would have had a little bit of a battle last weekend had it not been for Leclerc's little incident. Can see Sainz top 5. Yes, absolutely love that. What do I think about Perez? Just talked about Perez quite a lot. Absolutely love him. Think he's exceptionally good. Do you see Sainz ever being a first driver at any team? I mean, he was at McLaren last season, really. I think he was the more experienced driver. Maybe not on number 1. They were quite fair between Sainz and Norris, weren't they? They didn't really pick a massive. Driver to go at the front. Increase mic volume. Is that bad? I can increase it a little bit. I don't want to go over the little decibel threshold, to be honest. Maybe I'll turn it up here a little bit. What was I saying? Carlos Sainz, do I think he's ever going to be the best driver at a team? Or even the number 1, like the outright number 1 driver? Probably not. Just because I can see him staying at Ferrari for a very long time, and I think he'll, in a similar way to McLaren, where they treated the drivers fairly equally. I think we're going to end up at a point where Leclerc and Sainz are treated fairly equally. I think they'll look at Leclerc and be like, "Yes, we did pin all our hopes on you as being this Ferrari world champion, but we've now got Carlos Sainz coming through, who's equally as good." So I think they might, have 2 drivers who are comparable to one another in Ferrari, and therefore Carlos Sainz moving in as like an equal driver to Leclerc. I can't see him being in a team and being like this outright number one, like you sort of have with Hamilton and Bottas, or with them at the minute Verstappen and Perez, where you have like a real obvious number one in the team, and a number two driver. I can't see that happening for Sainz. I think he's quite a bit of a team player as well. Why aren't I watching Belgium, Italy? I will be very, very soon, to be honest with you. I don't really know what the time is. It is 8:20. So it does make sense. Is it on? Are we watching? Has anything happened? Who won out of Spain and Spain go through on penalties. And Belgium, Italy, nothing's happened yet. I haven't missed anything too massive. But with that said, I will probably leave you guys. We've been talking for an hour and a half. It's been absolutely wonderful to get your ideas moving into next weekend. As always, I will be live tomorrow for qualifying as well. But I'm going to leave you there. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Make sure that you do watch some Euros highlights. If something happens, Lando could be a dark horse for the championship. I mean, that would be one hell of an incident. I mean, for both Red Bull and Mercedes to drop off that much. Yeah. I know he is the only driver to have scored in every race, and he's consistently getting those top 5 finishes. And I've spoken at length already on this stream about how much I absolutely love Lando Norris. But that would be a real shock. Like a real shock if Lando Norris was able to actually win a championship in the McLaren. That would really that would probably push me over the edge as a McLaren fan, to be honest with you. I think I'd maybe just have to leave Formula One. Just sort of, oof. That was the best it's going to be. It's never going to be any better than that. Let's leave that at the door and move on with life. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you go and watch Belgium, Italy. It's now on. We're going to see probably who we're going to play in the final, because I can't see Spain beating either Belgium or Italy, considering their overall form in this tournament. I know they're getting better and better, but Italy just look good. And Belgium just, I know it's always the end of the generation, but they've just got so much talent. Lukaku is so good. Thorgan Hazard is underrated just because he's Eden Hazard's brother. But yeah, Belgium, very, very good team. So I think it's going to be Italy or Belgium in the final for us in the Euros, isn't it? As I've just said, England are going to get to the final and I've jinxed it. Anyway, goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you tomorrow for some qualifying.